Good afternoon, Greater Sudbury. Mark Gentili here, the managing editor of Sudbury.com, or the editor of Sudbury.com, my new title. As we continue with these live stream interviews with officials regarding COVID-19, you can watch the de-evolution of my hair as my lack of ability to get a haircut continues to hamper my fashion sense. Not that my fashion sense was very good to begin with. Today, MP Paul Lefebvre, Sudbury MP Paul Lefebvre is with us. How are you doing today, Mr. Lefebvre?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Well, other than my hair,
yes,
I'm
having a bad hair day. It's not that bad, Mark. You're doing fine. Fine.
I appreciate that.
No problem.
I don't live in your riding, but I still appreciate the compliment.
There you
go. Well, let's dive right into this. We heard the Prime Minister today at his daily address talking about providing some support for small businesses in Canada. I was kind of wondering if you might be able to sort of reiterate what the Prime Minister said for those who either missed our story or missed the Prime Minister's presser or other coverage. Could you just sort of reiterate what the federal government is offering to small businesses in Canada?
Yeah. So last week we announced the Canada loan, emergency loans for small business, and so it was $40,000 for businesses that had a payroll between $50,000 and $1 million. And so even before we kind of launched it officially, we had obviously been discussing it, and we were getting a lot of feedback saying that $50,000, a lot of small businesses didn't qualify, didn't have that big of a payroll, and as well there's a lot of small businesses that were just above that threshold. So we listened, and as we full Canadians, we're going to be trying to adapt that as we move forward. There's so many moving pieces to as things change on a daily basis. So what we announced today, instead of the $50,000 to $1 million thresholds, we've lowered the threshold to $20,000 to $1.5 million. So actually, I had a lot of calls to make this morning, and I made a lot of calls to small business owners that were thrilled because they were falling through the cracks, as we say. They were just falling outside of those parameters, so they were thrilled. The other one that we announced is is for rent. So the Canadian, I believe we're calling it the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance. What we're also hearing is that we're dealing with the issue of payroll, as with the wage subsidy and as well as the CERB, so people that are being laid off, certainly they qualify for the emergency response benefit. And people that are continuing to operate, but they don't have a lot of revenues, the revenues have dropped, we're offering the wage subsidy over 75% refund of their payroll, which is huge. That being said, the next big item on a business's expense is the rent. And so, I know a lot of landlords have come up and have been great for the tenants to deal with. And so, but we know that with these businesses to continue, they need support for rent. So we're exploring the possibilities, but with the obviously of how we were able to address this. But since the beginning, my concern is that rent is usually a provincial jurisdiction. And so the Prime Minister said today, well, we need to work with the provinces to move ahead with some sort of rent supplement or rent support for businesses. Because at the end of the day, for a lot of businesses, this is what's going to not allow them to reopen or actually have to close in the next few months. It's great that they don't have a payroll, but if they still have $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of rent a month with zero revenue coming in, they can't function. They will never be able to operate. Could you operate? And it's concerning because at the end of the day, they've usually signed off their houses. Right. They've put obviously their own money up front. They are the ones that would lose everything that they have. And since the beginning, we've been trying really hard to try to address a lot of these issues as we're moving forward to see how can we help business owners to keep employees, to keep people employed. And so I think today's announcement was really, it was welcome. I was thrilled to see it, but I know that there's more work to be done, and we continue to listen to Canadians as to how when we come out of this situation, we want to make sure that people can get their jobs back as quickly as possible. Right.
Now, for business owners who want to take advantage of this, again, they should be reaching out to CRA.
For the $40,000 loan, actually, it's through their banks. Okay. So this is a government-backed loan. So the only threshold is to have a payroll. That's it. It's not means tested at all. And now, if you have a payroll between $20,000 to $1.5 million, you qualify. You need to talk to your bank. The banks there's an application to fill out that you do with your bank. And this is a government-backed loan, and it's interest-free until 2022, December 2022. And if you pay it back, actually you get to keep 25%, so $10,000. So basically, you only have to pay back $30,000 of the 40,000. So these are measures that we have never seen in the history of our country.
Right.
But we realize we need to be nimble. We need to get the money out as quickly as possible to help these businesses survive through as we change and as we come out of this pandemic.
Okay. Just on the subject of support for Canadians, we're hearing a lot of chatter online, particularly on Facebook. We're seeing people wondering if for the CERB, for those for workers who can no longer work because of the pandemic, there's a lot of chatter online that people believe that they need to reapply for the CERB every single month. Is that the case?
That is the case. So every 4 weeks you need to reapply because we want to make sure that you're still in the same situation, because you can qualify for it for 16 weeks, actually from March 15th to, I believe, don't quote me on, I think it's October 15th as well. Like there's another date in October. So within, you can qualify. Yeah, I think it's 16 weeks within those days. So within those 6 months. So, and that's why we're giving the flexibility, because some people are able to get some money and then they can't. And so we want to make it the program as flexible as possible. So you can get it for a month. Then if you can work for a month and then you get back on it for a month, depending, because we want to make it very flexible. That's why we made it flexible. But that's why we need people to keep reapplying for the 16 weeks to demonstrate that they don't have any income coming in.
Okay. Now we heard, the International Monetary Fund. Some people like it, some people don't like the International Monetary Fund, but they predicted recently that Canada's economy is going to could shrink, I should say, by 6.2% over the course of this pandemic, which is double what they're forecasting for the global economic retraction. They're forecasting 3% global retraction. So this obviously, if that's the case, this would make this the sort of the worst economic situation Canada's ever been since the Great Depression in the 30s. Now, a lot of people believe, I think, at least from the comments that we're seeing and some of the reaction that we're seeing online to things, that some people believe that we are irreparably damaging our economy with our sort of strong response to COVID. How do you respond to that point of view?
I heard that chatter myself, and people are kind of putting a price on lives, right? And I don't agree with that. At the end of the day, as a government, we need to do everything to try to save as many lives as possible. Because at the end of the day, the last thing we want is for our frontline workers in the hospitals and our hospitals to be overwhelmed. Because once that starts to break down, that is one of the pillars of a democratic society. And if our health system cannot withstand, and we're seeing some of that certainly in our neighbors in the south, we saw the damage that it can do in a country like Italy. But they had to shut down too. So not only was it decimating their health system, it decimated their economy at the same time, because you cannot do both. So I think people need to be a bit more patient. But at the end of the day, you know what? The reality is this virus will be upon us for a while. Right? There's no vaccine. They're saying at least within a year to get a vaccine. So to me, the real question is, how do we get to some sense of normalcy with living with this virus among us? And it's not an easy conversation, because so what does that world look like? To me, that is the real conversation. Just not saying, let's ignore it. Let's ignore the virus and hope that it doesn't hit any of us. That means that you're putting the lives of everybody at risk. Certainly the most elderly, so your parents, your grandparents, and your aunts and uncles that are most at risk. And that's the last thing any country, I think, should be doing.
Canada's response, every country is sort of responding to the pandemic in different ways. Some countries are being, very, very strong and forceful in the reaction. South Korea, a place like Finland, they've locked things down. Other countries, Sweden is a little bit more, I don't want to say loosey-goosey, but their approach to it has been a bit more relaxed than other countries.
Yes.
Canada Canada has had a fairly strong response. Do you believe that we're doing enough as a country to respond to this crisis? Could we be doing more? Should we be doing less?
That's a great question. I think given the federation that we are, right? So obviously you have the federal government and the provinces. So every province has a role to play as well. And that's a bit of it's an opportunity in the sense that it's a good thing and it's a challenge as well. Because every province kind of are doing their own thing. I know that there's discussions on a daily basis between provincial officials, which is great. But that being said, we're seeing different responses. I know in BC, there's tons of testing. And in Ontario, we're kind of ramping that up now. And so, which is, again, so that's kind of where I think that the challenges lie, is that we're finding that the different provinces are doing different things. But if you look at our numbers, when we compare ourselves to other countries, we're in a pretty good spot. Certainly when we compare ourselves to Western democracies. You have other countries like Singapore and Taiwan, but at the end of the day, privacy laws do not really apply in those countries. And for our government, it's always been trying to balance your privacy rights, and certainly how do we address and how do we balance the health of the community at the same time. That is a challenge that we had since day one. But when like I said, when we compare ourselves, I think we're on the right path. We are starting to see the curve bending, and that's what we want to see. But we're not out of the woodworks yet, and we still have a ways to go.
Okay. And on the subject of having a ways to go, and on the subject of the impact on our economy, what kind of discussions are being held at the upper echelons of government about how to strategically restart the economy once we can open things back up again? Are those discussions being held? Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah. Well, for sure, those discussions are being had, just not at the federal level, but with the provinces, the municipalities, Indigenous communities as well, and certainly with unions, with business leaders. How do we see this? And as I said before, the reality is this virus will be among us for a while. So how does it look to try to minimize any exposure that we can have? So I believe this is in the discussion that we're having, certainly the testing becomes critical. We've been fortunate to see a made in Canada technology that was just approved by Health Canada last week that is able to test individuals and having a response within 30 minutes. So the more of this technology that rolls out, so that science is catching up. We've only known this virus for 3.5 months now, and that's starting in Wuhan, China, right? So not even in Canada. In Canada, we're looking at a month and a half to actually see the effects of how this virus obviously propagates among us. And so so the testing becomes critical as to how we move forward. Everybody having access to PPE, so personal protection equipment, right? So we need to have that to have the confidence to move forward, and as well as be able to be able to follow cases, right? If we're going to be resolving cases, we need to have better data and technology to see if you have it, where are you, where were you, and be able to trace, and as to how we're going to be able to suppress the virus as much as we can and get the economy going at the same time. And that is the challenge that we're seeing. So having big festivals like tomorrow would be a bad idea, given that we are not able to test everybody. We don't know who's asymptomatic right now. So the science needs to catch up before we really start to go to a sense of normalcy. And I know, and I can tell you this, there's tons of research. We've funded a lot of research in Canada and around the world to an unprecedented level to try to get the science to catch up, to determine what we're up against and try to get the best measures to at least stop it, to control it, and then we'll be able to start saying, let's go back to a sense of normalcy.
A lot of Canadians are starting to, I mean, like you said, it's only been a month and a half that Canada has been dealing with the pandemic, but already, there's a lot of people are beginning to chafe under the, under the lockdown, under things being closed up, and there's a sense from some people that the cure might be worse than the disease itself. And we're still hearing that. Even, we heard that at the beginning. We're still hearing some of that today. How do you respond? I'm sure you get comments like this from people, but how do you respond to that sort of criticism that, the cure is, again, COVID-19 isn't all that bad, isn't much worse than the flu. We're still hearing that. Do you try and convince people of, that it is worse than the flu? I mean, how do you respond to constituents who approach you with that kind of?
My response is, listen, we are relying on science and the Health of Canada officials to advise us. I don't think it's a role of a politician to determine what is the best science out there or to ignore the science or tell people that we should ignore the science that is out there. I think that's very dangerous. And so my approach has always been, listen, the science is telling us that this is actually this virus, and the data is actually proving it as well. It's so dangerous among us. We're seeing results in the States and even in Canada, in our nursing home, which is decimating the people in nursing homes. So the proof is there now, and we're actually seeing it and living it. So there's a data out there. There are stories out there of what this virus can do. And I'm not going to put the lives of your parents, of your kids in jeopardy if I have the ability as a politician to put measures in place based on science that we have right now and based on the advice of the top scientists in the country.
And on that same topic, we've heard now President Donald Trump is cutting funding, U.S. funding to the World Health Organization, saying that they've both bungled the response to COVID-19 and novel coronavirus, and that he is uncomfortable with their relationship to China. We're hearing that some of that now from people in Canada. We're seeing in the comments people, expressing distrust for the World Health Organization, all of that sort of stuff. What do you make of that? Like, what do you make of that sort of response? How do you feel about Donald Trump's stance on the World Health Organization cutting funding in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, certainly, in my opinion, it's not time to kneecap any international organization that is out there to help the world in the middle of a pandemic. Now is not the time to cut the funding. And again, Canada's position has been quite clear. We're going to continue supporting these international organizations. We're going to try to participate and to have because we have a seat at that table to feed in the data that we have to certainly work with other countries to eradicate this virus. And I think that's the approach to have. And the WHO has obviously the mandate to do that around the world. And so we need to continue supporting those organizations. And again, as I said before, the science is what's going to lead us. And the science that the WHO has been advising, again, they have been adapting to this virus as well. That's been out there for 3.5 months. And so we need to follow their lead. And that's what we've been doing since day one. And I think the proof as to with the results that we're getting in Canada, again, we'd prefer to have better results, but I think when we compare ourselves, we're looking at pretty significant, pretty acceptable results as of now.
Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is among those who says that he is concerned about the WHO's handling of the pandemic and about the WHO's sort of relationship with China. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, we've got to be focused on the task at hand. At the end of the day, we can't be looking at other comments saying, well, look at different organizations and trying to put the blame around. At the end of the day, we got to be learning from what we were doing last week, what we were doing yesterday, and how we can improve and how to bend the curve and get to some sort of, and to try to attack this virus and be on the offensive against this virus. And again, it's working on the science, making sure that our frontline workers are well protected, and making sure that people that are essential workers are protected as well as we continue down this path of, again, eradicating the virus and trying to get to a sense of normalcy in our world. And that is the task at hand. Passing the blame around, there'll be plenty of time to do that later on. Right now, it's focusing on getting people food on their table and making sure that they have a roof over their heads as we get through this pandemic.
Okay. Now, over the Easter weekend, both Mr. Scheer, who I just mentioned, and the Prime Minister have taken a bit of heat this week for some travel that they took over the weekend and recently. Were you concerned about that? Do you think it sends the wrong message? Do you think it sends the message of what's good for you is not necessarily good for me, that sort of a thing?
So I think both have answered that question for themselves. I think I could leave it at that. But what I will say is this: at the end of the day, I'm sure that they're not the only ones who've been trying to get to with their families, certainly with their immediate families, their kids and their wives, on the long weekend of Easter. For the Prime Minister, as we know, is the lake, where his family's been at for the last 2.5 weeks, I believe, since Sophie Trudeau has obviously came out of her battle with COVID. They went to the cottage with the family. He's been using his residence actually as the official office. So now that kind of is a second home for him. And so anyways, again, it's down this, at the end of the day, people have to make their own choices. And again, they followed the guidelines that they were proposed by the health officials. So again, they can answer those questions, but I think it's a red herring. We need to do what we have to do for ourselves with the means that we have.
Okay, that's fair. But does it send the wrong message though? That we're telling you people, we're telling the public not to travel, but Well,
I would say I think in Sudbury, having 25 kilometers away, certainly for the Prime Minister going to your residence 25 kilometers away is quite normal. I think in Sudbury, people travel all the time to get to work in Sudbury, actually, is more than 25 kilometers away. So I think on that side, no, I don't think it's, if you got to get to work and you got to get to see your family, and that's one thing. And I think with respect to Mr. Scheer, he answered that himself. You know what? I'm not even going to be partisan here. Like, he was with his family. He approached the other ones on the plane saying, do you agree with this or not? Elizabeth May, that was on the plane, came out and said, We will all work together. We got to, and is it an essential service that the leader of the opposition gets to the House of Commons for a debate, for a special debate on the long weekend? I think it is. And so I think at the end of the day, if we want to see our democracy continue, those things need to happen. And so, again, Mr. Scheer has answered those questions. And so it's up to the public to make up their own minds if that's acceptable to them or not.
Sure. Opening up the border. Donald Trump has said he wants to see the border reopened. The Prime Minister has said, well, hold on there. That might be a little bit premature. Are we going to continue to see this sort of, back and forth between Canada and the U.S. over the response to the pandemic? And given that, can we trust that we can work with them to get North America through this?
We've been going back and forth with them since 2016, and that's a reality. And that's fair, right? Obviously, we've established great relationships with them, and I agree with Mr. Trump that Canadians are doing exceptionally well in this COVID response, and there's nothing to fear from Canada and Canadians. So I agree with that. But at the same time, this ban for cross-border travel, certainly it's up to, I think next week it's up to the 30-day period that we've established. I've been advocating that we should be renewing that timeline, and so I think at the end of the day that's the responsible thing to do. And I think certainly as the Prime Minister has said, we're looking at how we can continue with the relationship we have with our neighbors, and certainly the border closed for the time being.
Okay. One last question, Mr. Lefebvre. Quebec, of course, has been incredibly hard hit by COVID-19. It is the hot spot in Canada, and recently Quebec expressed some interest in perhaps having the Canadian military provide some assistance. Are we at that point yet in Quebec or in Ontario that we need to take that extra step of the Emergencies Act and all this?
That's a great question. And certainly those are the calls from the provinces. It's not the federal government that's going to imposing the army to go down and help them. So in Quebec, that message has come up saying, how can the federal government help? And certainly we're looking at everything on the table to get them to help get this under control. I think that the main fear right now, and we're starting to see that in Ontario, is that it's spreading in our nursing homes, right? To a sense that it's decimating these homes. It's heartbreaking to see. And so are there measures out there? Are there tools out there? Is there infrastructure out there that we can use to help reduce this? And if the army is one of the tools that we have, let's use it. So, but again, it's up to the provinces to ask the federal government, and that's how our federation works, to say we have an emergency situation. We want more help. Can we get that help to come up to assist us? And certainly those are conversations that are being had right now between the federal government and certain provinces.
Excellent. Sudbury MP Paul Lefebvre, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon on Sudbury.com. Readers, for all your latest COVID-19 news, there isn't really much else happening, apparently. No. It seems to be all COVID all the time. Head to Sudbury.com any time of day. We've got you covered. And wash your damn hands. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.